Welcome to Candid Conversation number 793. I got an email that a couple weeks ago I started a series on Tuesday nights on sound doctrine, and the first sound doctrine is fooling man's conscience about evil. And I mentioned the steps of how that works. Sex is used to go down that road to where you get rid of the knowledge of God. And the first step, and he mentions the email, first step, multiple opposite sex partners, next multiple same-sex partners, next transgender, and he says in this email, one very important step, you avoided masturbation, sex with oneself. What is that in this picture? He says, I don't know the real numbers, but I guess in churches 90% of all children masturbate today, and in the world 99%. And one study about the U.S., I read that 60% of all youth pastors watch porn online and masturbate. Wow. Paul writes, if you burn, marry, but in today's church you hardly find a spouse. So people burn and cannot do anything about it. Of course, it is not okay to masturbate. So what he did is sort of the sin. It's a sin to start off with, and it's something that people don't talk about because I guess, like he says, everybody's doing it. I can't believe 60% of youth pastors. Wow. Anyway, the way, if you look at the progression in Romans 1 and understanding the Romans 1, the sound doctrine message that I did on that, fooling man's conscience concerning evil, I think would help understand this. The idea here is that you have the knowledge of God. Everybody knows there's a God. He's worthy of our worship. We know that we are sinners. We are not God, and that we are worthy of the judgment of death from God as a result of our sin. Romans 1:32. And so we went over that in this message on Tuesday night. Now, then it says, but man, when he knew God, glorified him not as God, neither was thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And what they do is they say, I want to bring God down to my level, and then I want to be up to where I am God. So the first thing you do then is you recognize that you're a man and the other sex is a woman, or vice versa, and you know that you've got good qualities in your mind, and the other one has good qualities in their mind. And so it's like, if you want to be God, well, you see the other sex as a competition to that, so to speak. And so that's where the first idea comes in, the multiple opposite sex partners, where you have sex with the opposite sex but multiple partners. And so then that way you sort of conquer that opposite sex, and you become Lord over them or God over them. And then you recognize, well, now the competition, then it's like I eliminated the competition of the opposite sex. Now I got to eliminate the competition of the same sex. So then I have sex with the same sex partners. And so it's like then you conquer that. And then the transgender stuff, that's where it comes into where so I've conquered that physically, I've conquered the opposite sex, then I physically conquered the same sex. But now I've got to have the mind to go along with it. So I need to, that's when the transgender comes in, where you think, I am who I declare I am. I'm a boy or a girl based upon what I say, not based upon how God made me. Because remember, I say there is no God, and I'm getting rid of the knowledge of God through opposite sex partners and same-sex partners. So now I've considered myself to be God, so then that means I can choose my own gender. So that's where all of that fits in. And really, to understand, you got to also understand why God created sex. There are two main reasons. Now, when God gave us a free will, he originally gave two checks against that free will. The first is marriage. And so if I've got a mind and my wife has a mind, the minds are different. Women think that the sins that men do, according to their sin nature, are disgusting. And so the wife is there to tell me how disgusting my sins are, to keep me from getting too far in those sins. And you got a sin nature. And, you know, you look at a couple that's unbelievers. There are many couples over the years who have been married 50, 60 years, unbelievers, but yet they stay together. And the other person really, again, they're not looking at their sin and saying, oh, I got to make sure I don't sin. I got to please God. I got to go to church. Yeah, they may not do all that, but they still stay married. And what it does in a society as a whole is it keeps the sin nature in check, to where you don't go too far with it. Again, if you're an unbeliever, you're going to sin. You've got a sin nature. That's all you're going to do is sin. But at least you won't get too extreme. And the sins of a man the sins of a man are more likely to harm society. There are greater external consequences to the sins of a man when his sin nature goes too far than you see, or it's harder to identify with a woman. Man's sins are usually against society as a whole. You know, if I get too extreme in my hatred, then I'm going to go kill people. If I get too extreme in my sexual things, then I'm going to rape people. You know, a woman wouldn't do those things normally. Her sin nature, she'll get hatred in her heart, just like a man. But the way it manifests in a woman is she's just going to backbite and gossip and do things to harm people with her words. And that's how she gets revenge or gets her hatred out. If she's going to commit the sexual sin, she lets that get out of control. Hers, instead of raping people, hers is going to be more like a fantasy type thing, where she's reading romance novels and fantasizing about guys and you know, how the perfect man would be for her. So the way that the man's sin nature gets out of control more is hurts society more as a whole. For the woman, it's more of an internal, and it's not, I mean, it still hurts people, but you don't have the crime so much that where you're killing people or raping people. So, and so what God does is, since we've got different minds and the sin natures manifest differently, then He creates marriage to be that check, the sin nature in check. And what He does then is He makes it natural for you to be attracted to the opposite sex. We went over that in this lesson, that Romans 1:26 and 27 says that the man left the natural use of the woman, and the woman working with another woman going against nature. So just like you have a sin nature where it's natural for you to sin, it's also natural for sexual sins for you to sin with the opposite sex, because that's what God has placed within everybody to have I shouldn't say everybody, because some people have the gift of celibacy, but He puts in you a desire to be with the opposite sex. Most everybody like that. So you get the homosexuals and they say we're born that way, and that's just not true. You have to be conditioned that way by society or by your conscience, or you just may have a natural propensity to go toward that sin more than other people. But you know, there are several reasons why, and this isn't about homosexuality, it's about masturbation, so we won't go into all that. But the point I'm trying to make is that God made sex, one, is to get the man and the woman together, and He made it natural for that to happen so that you would desire to be with the opposite sex and spend your life with that same person. And what that would do is it would keep your sin nature in check. So yeah, again, unbelievers, you know, I know unbelieving couples that have been married 55, 60 years, and they don't care about pleasing God. They don't care about living a life free from sin, but yet they are going to, you know, the man is not going to go out and murder or rape anybody or commit adultery, and the woman is not going to get involved in fantasies about her perfect man or go backbite and gossiping and all that, because the opposite sex keeps the other person's sin nature in check. And so God created sex drive, because otherwise you're not going to be with that other person. Why would you do that? You know, you like here in Alabama, the two big college football teams is basically you're either an Alabama fan or you're an Auburn fan. You're not going to, if you're an Alabama fan, you're not going to go to a club or bar or someplace, sports bar, let's say, that has where they're all Auburn fans and go there. You're just going to go and root for Alabama. You're not going to buy season tickets to the Auburn games and watch all the Auburn teams if you're an Auburn games if you're an Alabama fan. You don't mix with the opposite team. And so it's the same thing when you get together like-minded things. There are clubs. There are clubs because you all have some common interest and you get together over that common interest. You don't ever have an opposites club. Oh, we have all chess players. We want half of our members are going to be chess players and half are going to be checkers players. Half of our members are going to be Alabama fans, half are going to be Auburn. And we're just going to get together, we're going to discuss and debate over our opposites. Now, we don't do that. But yet, when it comes to marriage, we have to get together with somebody of the opposite sex because they have a different mind from us to keep our sin nature in check. So God puts a drive within us, a sexual drive to be with the opposite sex, to find that attractive. That's natural. Even in your sin nature, that's natural to be attracted to the opposite sex. So, and the second reason God created, so he has to make it to where you've got a sex drive where you desire sex and to where you desire with the opposite sex so that the mind from the opposite sex can keep your sin nature in check. So you don't do that with anything else. Alabama people don't say, well, I'm going to join the Auburn club because that's opposites. You want to be with a group of people you get along with. You don't want to be with a group of people that disagree with you. You might do it for fun or something because you enjoy creating conflict or something, but you only do it once or twice. You're not going to be there for 50 years like you would be a marriage. So God had to create sex to be enjoyable, and he had to create it to where you want to, you have a natural desire to be with the opposite sex so that mind of the opposite sex could keep your sin nature in check. And then the second check against your free will is children. So God also makes it to where most people anyway, especially women, not necessarily as much men, but most people, I would say, even men and women, desire to have children because we're selfish human beings in our flesh, in our sin nature, and so we desire to have little mini-me's running around, people that look like us that we created. It's like, we want to mock God, we want to be like God, so we want to be creator, and that's the closest thing we could do to that. Creating life. I mean, you could create inanimate objects or you could create artificial intelligence, but to create a real live human being, and not only that, but a human being that looks and acts and thinks and talks like you. So people have that desire to have children, and so then God makes it to where only a man and a woman getting together can have a child. So what God does then is when he creates free will, automatically he creates two things to keep the sin nature in check because he knows we would sin, and that's first one is marriage and the second is family. And so when you see that they're trying to get rid of the knowledge of God, what they try to do is get rid of the checks against their own sin nature. So if you have sex with multiple opposite sex partners, then what you're doing is, because sex is pleasurable, God made it that way, you're seeking the pleasure of it, but at the same time, you're not going against nature. When you make the step into homosexuality, what you're doing is you're going against nature. And because then you're just pursuing it for the pleasure's sake, but and you're trying to keep away from having the opposite sex check your sin nature. So the woman thinks the man's sins are utterly disgusting, but if you become a homosexual and get with another man, you can still create pleasure through sex. It's still not the same because the parts don't fit like God made them, so it's not as pleasurable, but you could still get that pleasure, and you could have somebody that has a similar sex drive to you, because not only did God make sex desirable, but he made it desirable in different ways. Then a woman wants to have sex, she gets to that point in different ways than a man does. And usually the men get there first, and the men's sex drive is more active than the woman's. And that's all about, keeping that balance there in your sin nature, keeping it in check. But if you got two men, homosexuals, getting together, then you have the same sex drive, the same things that get them aroused, and so they're all of one mind, and so then they can use sex and just get carried away in it. The Bible says to let all things be done in moderation, but there is no moderation in homosexuality. First, you lose your moderation when you stop having just one partner with the opposite sex, and so then it's not about a committed, lifelong relationship with the other person. So the sex is more pleasurable because the parts fit, but with a man and a woman, but you don't have the connection with the other person, and you don't have the sin nature checked so much. You have it a little bit, then you get to, that's why you have people who, like on Frasier or like on Seinfeld, they show them, both of them had, I think, like 70 different partners, all of the opposite sex, over those 7-8 years, however long it was on TV. Now, of course, it's all made up, but you can have things like that happen because you just have one partner of the opposite sex and you think it's wonderful, and then when they start getting onto you about the things of your sin nature that's disgusting, well, you get rid of that one, you go to the next one. But it's easier if you just have the same sex partner, but then not as pleasurable, and you can't have the kids, so that becomes a problem too. But what you're doing when you go away from God's design of one man and one woman for life, then what you're doing is you're pursuing sex as a pleasurable thing rather than for a good thing. And so when it comes to masturbation, I didn't cover it because it doesn't really fit into the degradation whole thing. But what it does is, I guess the best thing I could say about it is, of course, the sex was designed, two purposes: to get you with an opposite sex person for your life, so that your sin nature is kept in check by that opposite sex, and then number two, so that you can have kids, because that would also fulfill the sin nature in some ways, and you have the kids, and then they are a check on your sin nature, because as a man and a woman, maybe you do something crazy, you decide to go out dancing all night, or to get drunk together, who knows what you decide as a man and a woman. You actually have your sin nature get together and do things sinful together. Well, then you have kids, that puts an end to that. A lot of people would never step foot in the door of a church, but yet when they have kids, suddenly they think, well, I got to train them up right. I don't want them to make the same mistakes I did, and they end up bringing them to church. And so when you go away, the moment you start having sex with multiple partners, then you're going away from that, and you're pursuing sex as a pleasurable thing, rather than something as God had intended. And so whenever you do that, that's fornication. You're getting away from the one man, one woman for life idea. And so all of that is sin. And so masturbation is included in that. But it's sort of a different thing. I guess the best way I could describe it, it's sort of like drugs. I think pretty much all drugs have some medical purpose to it. Let's say painkillers, opioids. That's a good one. It's been abused lately. Think of sex sort of like opioids. Opioids can be good. I mean, I had a bad toothache. My tooth is killing me until I got a prescription to take hydrocodone, I think it is. And anyway, an opioid. And I took it for 2 or 3 days. And then I had my tooth pulled. And then I took it for 2 or 3 more days. And then I got rid of the stuff. So opioid was a very good thing. It was a good painkiller because I was really in a lot of pain. Couldn't really even function without taking something. So there's a good medicinal use for the opioid when you're in pain, and it's for a limited thing. But then people say, well, I feel good because I took that. And so now, then you start making an excuse. And you say, well, so you keep taking it longer than you need it, but you say, well, I got to take it out because my back hurts. I got back pain. And so then you keep taking it. And then all of a sudden, as time goes on, you're taking more and more to feel better and better about yourself. And then finally, then you start to get into more drugs. Let's say you get into heroin now. And that's really out there off the wall. And I think there are probably some legitimate medical uses for heroin. And I'm not a doctor. I don't know all this stuff. But the point is, then when you become a heroin addict, you're not just taking it to get away from the tooth pain or the back pain that you have. You're not making excuses to say, well, I really have the back pain. It's just you're pursuing it for pleasure. That's all it is. And then you got to have more of it. And then it becomes less pleasurable. And then it gets to the point where you got to shoot up heroin just to feel normal. So it's not about feeling great, or it's not about getting rid of pain, and it's not about feeling great. Recreational drug use, it's just, you're doing it just to feel normal again. And that's what I would say when it comes to sex, is that when you get into the multiple sex partners of the opposite sex, then you're doing it for a pleasure thing, but, it may be a more committed relationship. But then when you get to the homosexual stage, well, now it's just doing it for pleasure. And then masturbation is just like that. You've gotten rid of, you're not going to have any kids this way. You're not going to be with the opposite sex for the mind thing. And so what you're doing is you're just pursuing sex for pure recreational benefit, just like a drug. And so since it's just recreational to the point, at first I would assume, it's very pleasurable, but then as time goes on, it probably gets less pleasurable and you got to do more to get the pleasure. And, I don't know how all that works, but I would think it's sort of like those recreational drugs. So the danger of it, and probably why 99% are, see, heroin, you don't have 99% of children shooting up heroin because there are all these physical side effects of it. And it costs a whole lot of money, and you probably can't function in society. It's a crime, so then you go to jail. But masturbation, it wouldn't cost much money, I wouldn't think. Society may frown upon it, but they sort of look the other way. You could do it in private, and you're not going to get thrown into jail for it. You don't have all the societal checks on that sin like you do, say, the heroin. And so that's why so many people are into it. And it's a society that's gone against what God says about sex and marriage, and so that they're just pursuing it purely for recreational use. I think it all started with the condoms, because now you could separate sex from the reproductive cycle, and so then you go down that downward spiral. And I think the last part is masturbation, because then you're not with the opposite sex, you're not with the same sex, you're just with yourself. It's just a recreational pursuit, like the heroin. And so it's not something that's going to, you're not killing anybody, so it's not a society thing where you're going to be locked up in jail. But what you're doing is you're going by the lust of your flesh, and it's out of control because there's no check on it, because it's just recreational use. And so you may not see the side effects in society, which is why they don't throw people in jail for it. At least I don't think they do. But it is something that can ruin a society from a spiritual point of view, because you're pursuing the lust of your flesh rather than seeking God and Christ. And so it's not part of that cycle in Romans 1, which is why I didn't cover it, but it's just something where it's just like saying, if you're looking at drugs, why you used opioids? Well, you use it because I got a toothache. Then you use it because it makes me feel good. And then next thing you know, you just take it just to feel normal. And so I think that's where you see with the sex. And when you get down to the masturbation level, it's just some recreational thing. God designed it for marriage. Well, you're not doing that. He designed it for having kids. You're not doing that either. So it's going against God's design, and it's something that you're just doing for fun. And I'd think you'd get bored with it. To be honest with you, I mean, I don't know how all that works, but I would think, if it's not pleasurable anymore, why? It seems like the pleasure would go away after a while. I mean, it seems like anything else, you just get bored with it. So why would you go along with it? But I guess it's some kind of pleasurable thing that people have, and a lot of it's society too. A lot of people who say they're homosexual is because society has told them that, or transgender because society has them say that. So it's a recreational use of sex that goes against God's design, so it's sinful. And it's going with the pleasures of the flesh rather than seeking the things of God. So that's the danger of it. And that's probably why people do it so much, is because we're a godless society. Thanks for watching.